series, one of the things that emerged from PhD students was an expression of interest for some specific sessions for PPI or for PhD students on how we can embed PPI in the PhD journey. So this is and then this is where this series emerged from. So this is a series for PhDs by PhDs, together with the PPI Ignite National Office and the local offices. A group of PhD students came together, and this series was planned and organized by us. So over the course of the month, we'll have more sessions, and we hope that you'll be able to join us for the series as a whole. But before we get started with our first case study, we'd like to know just a little bit about who's here with us today, virtually. So we might ask people to put into the chat your name and just where in the world you are at the moment. So yeah, if you could do that. Fab. So we have Aideen from Cork, and Alex at Swansea University in Wales, Saoirse in Mayo, Paula, who's a physiotherapist from Brazil, but currently based in Dublin, Rebecca in Galway, Meghan in Galway, Marion in Dublin. Am I missing anyone here? Poonam from Cork, Sarah in Dublin. Great, we've a nice spread there. Adele from Salt Hill. So yeah, we might launch. We have just a few polls. John, if you could launch the first poll. To the first poll. So can you just let us know which role you identify most with here? We'll wait for people to have a chance to answer. And then John, can you?
That's about everyone there now.
Launch the.
And we'll share results.
Share the results. So most of us here are PhD scholars. We have a master's student, a PPI contributor, and an academic, and other. Fabulous. Then the next poll there. Question 2. On a scale of 1 to 5, how familiar are you with PPI? So 1 being not very familiar and 5 being quite, you know, you've a fair good sense of it.
All right, that's everyone there now.
Fabulous. So we kind of have a range here. So some people with are beginning their journey, and then some people in the middle, and more people with quite familiar, and yeah. And we have the final question, which in my opinion is the most interesting. You've launched, yeah.
Apologies there.
So.
Has that been launched there for you? Oh no, apologies, sorry. My mistake. Back.
No pressure, John.
No pressure. Drum roll, please.
Sometimes technology works against us. It's because I haven't stopped sharing this one. My mistake.
That's okay.
Sorry, guys. There you go.
So, would you rather fight 1 horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? Let us know.
I could go on for a good 10 or 15 minutes arguing with this with people, I think. I have strong opinions. Okay, that's about everyone there now.
Okay. Drum roll, please. Oh, most people are 100 duck-sized horses. I was also this, so I am biased that I think this is the right answer. John, do you have any strong opinions about which is?
Yeah, it was my. I think the only reason ducks are cute is because they're so small. As soon as you get it to a dog size, you have a goose and they're aggressive. Horse size, gone. We're lost. All right, I'll stop sharing that and we'll move on.
Okay, so we will now move on to our first case study. So first up, we have Saoirse Lally from the University of Galway in speech and language therapy. Saoirse is a PhD student, and she's going to have a chat with Edel is going to facilitate this 20 minutes, and they're going to share about her PPI journey. And so we have 20 minutes for kind of a chat, and then if everyone could save their questions, we'll have 5 minutes at the end for questions that you can direct to Saoirse. So I will hand you over to Edel and Saoirse.
Great. Thanks a million, Ayla. So my name is Edel Murphy. I'm the National Programme Manager of the PPI Ignite Network. I've been working obviously with Ayla and the other PhD scholars, as she has mentioned, and John, to organise the series. So I am delighted to be facilitating this first conversation as a case study on how to embed PPI in a PhD. I'm not sure I ever met Saoirse, but we're about to have, I did, I met you once, Saoirse. We're going to have a conversation about Saoirse's PhD. So Saoirse, over to you to introduce yourself.
Yes, and thanks, Edel. Thanks, Ayla. Like Ayla said, my name is Saoirse. I'm in my third year of PhD, and my PhD is focusing on looking at children who speak Polish and English, and developing some form of a language assessment that speech and language therapists can do with those children. So that's kind of the context of which we'll be trying to discuss how we've embedded PPI into that project.
Excellent. Thanks a million, Saoirse. And yeah, so what we're really going to focus on is the PPI aspect to it. So take us back to the start of your journey. I know it began when you were doing your undergraduate.
Yeah, so I did an undergraduate project between 2018 and 2019, and it was focused on kind of the same area, bilingual language assessment. And it was, a very short project, and you don't have any funding and you're limited with time and everything like that. But we got a lot of kind of informal feedback from the kids who were doing the tasks, and then the parents who were helping with the tasks. And the year after that, then I decided to do a master's and to kind of continue that research on at a master's level. Just kind of extended a little bit more. But again, anyone who's done a master's, you know what the time limits and stuff are like for projects. And I was working for a while, and I decided to apply for funding to do a PhD, which luckily I got. And with kind of the funding application, I kind of had to outline, I suppose, the project in whole to get the funding. And then some of my supervisors, so I have 3 supervisors, but 2 of them in particular, suggested incorporating some form of PPI into the project. And that came from the feedback that we'd gotten informally from the parents and from the children from the previous 2 projects, that we wanted to do something with it where we had the time, but to do it in a little bit more of a realistic, or kind of for want of a better word, a formal setting, as opposed to just getting the feedback while you're doing the research and then not doing anything with it. And we thought that kind of PPI would be the best approach for that.
Excellent. That's really interesting. I'm not sure any of the people on board will agree you've loads of time doing your PhD, but I know what you mean. It's a longer extended period that you can get started. So I think that's really interesting that your 2 supervisors kind of were saying, look, it's not good enough to get the feedback and do nothing with it. And, you obviously felt that yourself as well. And when you started, I think it's of interest people here, had your supervisors prior experience of doing PPI, or were they coming to a new, or, where was your starting point on that aspect?
Yeah, so I'm actually lucky enough that one of my supervisors is Dr. Ruth McMiniman, who's heavily involved with PPI. And my primary supervisor who they're both working in the speech language therapy department, had said, look, have a chat with Ruth, see what she says, because I myself don't have any experience with PPI. And I myself didn't have any experience with PPI and had never heard of it up until that point. So got in contact with Ruth, and Ruth is Ruth. She's so helpful that, we kind of put a plan together of how we could weave it into the project, and how it would best, I suppose, inform what we were doing and make it a little bit more realistic and a little bit more implementable, as opposed to, write your thesis and leave it on shelf.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. So Ruth McMenamin is the site lead of our PPI Ignite network at the University of Galway, or one of two. And did you do that in Galway? I know, Saoirse, there's a module on PPI, like an accredited module. Did you take that module?
Yeah, I did. I took that module in first year, second semester of first year, which, again, Ruth had suggested, mainly because, again, I was starting from zero, and if there was a level lower than zero, that's probably where I was starting from in terms of PPI. Never heard of it, didn't know what it was, and I'd come from a background of research where it's very, you get your data, you analyze your data, you publish your data, and that was kind of it. And it was a whole new area, a whole new branch of kind of, I would say, kind of implementing research in a functional way. And so I did that module, and we kind of had to put together a plan within that module of how we were going to embed PPI within our projects, and then present it and get feedback from the module coordinators and module leads. So that was very worthwhile. And then, as well as that, you're kind of given kind of resources and where to access resources. And, the PPI Ignite section of most of the websites for the universities have lots of information and stuff like that. So it was a nice foundation to start getting to know about PPI and how would be the best way to embed it into the project. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I know it's already in Galway, but there is a module, or there will be a module rolled out in some of the other universities over the next year or two, which I think is a good development for PhD students. Okay, so you had your plan, and then you had to get started. So maybe tell us a little bit about, how did you decide who you were going to include, and how did you go about finding people and all that early phase?
Yeah, I actually remember when I was doing the PPI module, we did a lot of, I went to a lot of these kind of talks with case studies in them, and everyone, when they were presenting their project, they'd done the project and they'd implemented the PPI. And I just felt so overwhelmed with how am I actually going to start and where do I actually start? And it took me a while to kind of take the traditional researcher hat off and put kind of a PPI hat on and say, they're not participants. You're inviting them to be on a panel and to advise on your research and consult on the research. So because I had done the two projects before, I had kind of links in the community with the Polish community. And so I got in contact with one of them and I explained the project, and she said she herself would be interested in doing it. And she would see if she could get some other people that she knew or within the community to join in the project as well. And the part of the PPI bit in my project is that we have a PPI group of 3 adults and 3 children. And the adults have their own children, so they bring their own children to the PPI meetings and groups and stuff like that. And so we kind of put that group together. The number that we chose 3 because we thought it would be kind of manageable, and we would have, say, if one dropped out, we'd have 2. But given that we had the 3 parents and the 3 children together, that's kind of how we started. I think it was the fact that I had experience working in the community, I had connections, and then kind of worked it that way.
Right. And when you say in the community, like, was this connected to was it around NUI Galway, University of Galway, or what community? Where, like, how did you actually find the people? Where were they?
So I'm based in Mayo, I'm based in Westport, and I was aware of they do Polish language classes in Westport, and I was aware of those, and I knew one of the teachers in there, so that's basically how I got.
Contacts. Okay, that's really interesting
Yeah.
because I think that's one of the things. One of the people involved in PPI often says, if you look around you in the shopping queue, you'll find your PPI contributors. Take
Yes,
this,
yeah, under your
yes,
nose.
under your eyes, very local. Okay, and interesting that you had your adults and your children in the same group. So that has obviously worked for you.
Yeah, it has worked. We were kind of just slightly concerned about safeguarding issues in terms of getting, say, 3 adults with 3 children that they didn't know. And so we kind of decided to stick with 3 adults with their own 3 children. And it works quite well in that, you know, you have a dynamic of parents. If kids are messing, the parents will tell them to, you know, stop. But they're not. They're a very good group, and they're very forthcoming with their ideas and any suggestions that they do have. We do separate sections within the group at times where we have the parents working on something and then I would work with the kids on something, and then we kind of come together. So far it's been working quite well. But I think the key for a successful PPI group is not to just jump in straight away and, you know, you have your agenda and just get through it. That you do need to build up a relationship or connection with these individuals, because, you know, they're real people and they will want to participate. And not to just jump in.
So that's an interesting point from the PhD's point of view. Like, I wonder, over the first few meetings, did you wonder, were you making any progress? But then was it time well invested?
Yes, the first meeting we did nothing about the project, in that I just explained to them what the group was about, and we just spent the afternoon just chatting and getting to know each other. And within the group dynamic as well, there was 2 of them who were quite friendly, 2 of the adults that were quite friendly, and then the kids all knew each other, and then one of the other adults was aware of the other 2 people but weren't, you know, within the same friend group as.
Right.
So the dynamic in that was good, but we kind of had to get everyone on the same.
Hi there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so yeah, slow at the start then I think is an interesting. And I know, sorry, now we might just mute whoever is unmuted there, John. And I think obviously there are other approaches in that having parents in separate from children is a way of doing it. But I think what you've done is a really practical approach, and I think that's one of the things about a PhD. You can't tick all the boxes and do everything. And that's a really interesting solution. And then in terms of the logistics of the meeting, and like, it's interesting even that you haven't been able to bring one of your group here today. So in terms of the logistics of the meeting, what were the challenges and how did you agree on the logistics and so on?
So the first meeting, I did suggest that we meet in person, and just to kind of get some, and I don't like using the word ground rules, but just kind of some outlines and some bullet points that we all agreed on. And so we did that first meeting in person. And I just did it in a classroom of a local school. I knew the principal and I asked, and he said that's fine. And I know not everyone is that lucky and with that sort of stuff, but that was pretty much it. And yeah, the timing is, you have to understand that these people that are in your PPI group are real people. They have lives, they have jobs, they have school. You need to work around them, whatever best suits them. And we kind of outlined that in the original meeting, that not all the meetings would have to take place in person, that we could do some of them online. And they were very happy to facilitate that. And as well as that, you're kind of working within, when you have the kids involved, you're working within kind of school terms. They're on holidays. You don't want to be asking them to do stuff during holidays, and they're gone on holidays with parents and families then as well. So the logistics at the beginning can be quite daunting, because again, although I said you have loads of time to do your PhD, by the time you get it all set up and figured out, you have quite a limited time to implement it. So you do kind of have to factor that in as well, and that it's not all going to run on your clock, that you do have other people's clocks to
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we're 11 o'clock on a Friday morning, so presumably now the kids are in school and the parents are working. So exactly. Yeah. Okay. So give us a few examples of how the group contributed to your research and to the development and evolution of your research plans.
So the first thing was actually with the invitation letters that we used to kind of access the PPI group in the beginning. where I had developed them with Ruth and with Martha, who's works with PPI in Galway as well. And we did it in a way that we thought was accessible to a PPI group. And so I thought that the first thing that I should actually probably do is ask them how they felt about those invitation sheets and letters and stuff like that. And then after that, we've worked on invitation sheets for actual data collection for the participants of the actual research. And we got actually quite interesting feedback from the parents, who said that a lot of the times when things are translated into Polish in Ireland within a healthcare setting, that it doesn't actually fully make sense when it has been translated. And so what we did was worked on the information sheets in English, got them professionally translated, and then gave them back to the PPI group. And then they said, well, say this bit doesn't make sense, that's too wordy, I don't understand that as a parent. You'd never get that in Poland from a speech and language therapy department or whatever. And then the kids themselves, when you go into, and I think this bit might be slightly specific to this project, but when you go into a project with your own kind of preconceived notions, and somebody says something to you, you're kind of a bit taken aback, but you understand, but it's something you'd never have thought of before. Whereas I would have thought, because the kids speak Polish and English, that the best thing to do would be to give them their information sheets in Polish. And when they sat down and looked at them, they said, well, why isn't the Polish and the English both on the same sheet? Because we're half Polish and we're half English. And that was their own identity and how they perceived themselves to be. Whereas in the previous research, I had given the information sheets and stuff like that to them in Polish only, and not in English. So we've been working on that sort of stuff. And then with the tasks, they're all pre-recorded tasks, and they have been developed by researchers, but it's kind of getting a ground level insight into, are they actually suitable for children? So the stories that some of the kids said they liked the story. The tasks are embedded into kind of Teddy's going on an adventure, just for a little bit of background. And some of them found it nice, but some of them thought it was a little bit babyish, whereas we just assume that it's, all kids find the same thing interesting and engaging. So that's kind of the stage we're at now, in terms of their level of involvement. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So they helped refine your qualitative questions as well. I think that's really interesting. And have you they couldn't come to the meeting, but I think you've some feedback from them that you'd like to share with the people today.
Yeah. So I asked them if one of them would like to come to the meeting with one of their kids, and they said that they would love to, but they just didn't have the time with work and with school and stuff. So they kind of wrote a little bit of a reflection about their time with the project so far. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, that's good. Actually, before people start to read, and this is terrible now, we let them read first. Right?
Yes, yeah.
And talk through it, Saoirse, if you like.
Yeah, so well, I could just read it out. So the adult that was in, one of the adults in the group said that, I should probably say that Polska Harp is the name that they came up for the group, and that was the kids mainly that came up with it, because they said the emblem of Ireland was, I thought it was very insightful for a child, but they said the emblem of Ireland was the harp, and they're half Irish, half Polish, so they have kind of their own emblem, which is like a Polish harp. So that's the name they picked for the group. And the parents kind of said, well, if the kids want to call it that, we'll call it that. And they had some fun in the first meeting, kind of coming up with a what would you call it, a logo as well for the group, which they wanted put on the WhatsApp group chat that we have for the PPI group, which was, again, nice, and a nice kind of learning opportunity for me in terms of kind of cultural appropriateness and working within that sort of a community. So
that's really interesting. And I think fair play to you, Saoirse. I love that bit there. Mummy, they actually listen. She doesn't know about Polish, but she wants to learn. I think that's a lovely reflection on the dynamic that you obviously have in the group. Okay, so maybe we move on, because I'm conscious I want to let people come in with questions. Saoirse, you mentioned that you had an interesting experience when you applied for ethics. Do you want to talk briefly about that?
yeah,
sharing there.
Yeah, so we had kind of a little bit of a dilemma around the ethics approach, whether we actually needed it or not. And one of my supervisors said, look, just to cover all our bases, we'll apply for it anyways, in case we want to publish anything that we collected from the PPI group. So I said, okay. So I applied to the ethics in the college for the PPI component as well as another section of the project. And we got a lot of kind of hesitancy from the ethics committee in that they didn't know what PPI was. They wanted more information on it. And then we got to the dilemma of the ethics application form itself is not consistent with PPI terminology. And so we kind of had to make it very explicitly clear in the ethics application which bit was which. And they were kind of hesitant to say that we weren't calling them participants because they're not participants in the project, whereas the ethics committee wanted them to be participants, just so that they would fit into a box was the best way I got from the feedback. Once we kind of explained it out explicitly, they were happy to approve it, but I don't know if it's fully, the understanding is fully there. But again, I think it comes down to the ethics form and the application process itself. It's not really conducive to PPI work.
Right, okay, but you got through it, and I think there is change happening in that area. Okay, I have to ask you one last question, and then I'll hand over to Ayla to take the overall questions, because this is the question everybody will want to know. Did you have a budget for your PPI, or how are you managing that aspect?
So we don't have any budget for it. I did make it aware, and did make the individuals in the PPI group aware at the beginning that they weren't going to be necessarily paid for it, but that they would get a token of kind of their time.
Acknowledgement, right.
And so it'll be in the form of kind of a one-for-all voucher around Christmas time. And I'm just kind of figuring out at the minute with my supervisors around what that actually will look like. Will it come from my research budget itself, or kind of from my own pocket, if that makes sense?
Okay. I think that's where a number of PhD students find themselves. Okay, yes. Thank you so much, Saoirse. I know people found it interesting. Ayla, do you want to take the questions there?
Thanks, Ida.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Saoirse. That was super. It's really interesting to hear about your work. Really, really interesting. We have our first question. Just if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and you can jump in and ask a question that way, or you can throw your question into the chat, either, whichever you're more comfortable with. So our first question is coming from the chat here, and it's from Paula. She says, I'm really interested in the parent-child dynamic in the PPI panels. I missed out on this, but were the parents part of the PPI panels as well as with the children, or were they separate panels? Yeah.
It's one combined panel, Paula. But having said that, there's different tasks within the panel that what the kids would do, but the adults would do. So sometimes the meeting will be with both groups together, and then other meetings will be with one group or the other group. So, for example, when we were going through the adult invitation sheets or the parent invitation sheets for the data, we just had the parents for that meeting, and then with the children's one, we just had the children at that meeting. And then some of them, the first few meetings, we had them together, and we did then a joint meeting with the parents and the kids together after each of them had individually done the invitation group. So it kind of evolves as the project goes on, and we kind of decide that together. It's not me saying, well, we're just going to have the adults now at this meeting. We kind of decide it as a group.
Really interesting. I have a question for you. It's around the ethical considerations. I suppose, I don't know, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but what are the ethical considerations when you're working with children on your as your PPI in your PPI panel? I suppose, are there resources? Are there guidelines? Were there any resources that were helping you along that journey that you used? Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, no, specific kind of PPI guidelines, I would say no. But I think what really stood to me in incorporating, say, the children and the parents into the one group is the clinical background that I have. And the guidelines of working with kids was kind of taken from that in terms of Garda vetting and safeguarding issues that we, having the door open if you're working with kids and having another adult there with the children and, not being alone with one child. So when we had the groups with the kids, they weren't very long groups, they were very short because attention span, and the parents were in a room adjacent to the room that we were in, but not involved in the meeting, if that kind of makes sense. But in terms of awareness of PPI guidelines around working with children, I'm not necessarily aware of any specific ones, but that's kind of where I took my lead from is the clinical kind of side of things, if that answers the question.
Thank you for sharing. And I see Adela's just popped in. There's an event as part of the festival looking at the ethics and working with children in a PPI approach. There's a question here, Helen has her hand raised. If you want to pop in there, Helen, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a lovely rounded discussion of your journey. You've very eloquently put about the difficulties of starting the journey. Have you had any thoughts about how you're going to finish the journey, or what next after your research with the panel? Because I suppose that's the sort of, once you start something, they sometimes want to keep going, or are interested, have evolved into an interest in research and being involved in this way. And I'm just sort of wondering if you have any thoughts or reflections of the impact, that you've had on them and maybe they have had on you as well.
Yeah, that has come up in discussions with my supervisors, and the individuals that are in the PPI group are kind of work in play schools and work in education themselves. And I would love, my kind of ultimate goal, I don't know now if this is kind of postdoc research area, but I would love to write a paper together with them about their experiences, because I think this project is slightly unique in that we do have a PPI group with parents and with children, but it's also bilingual. So their first language is not my first language. And I would love, ideally, I don't know how open the journals would be to this, but have the abstract published in Polish and in English. I think if you're doing something like that and you're working with the community and you want to make it usable for them, that's probably, a nice way to continue the research, but also to kind of, I won't say end the research, but I would say kind of bring it to a natural conclusion.
Yeah, no, I know it's sort of very much, you always think about your researching, and from the academic viewpoint, we think of our research publications, but there's so much learning and richness from the experiences that, and demonstrating today just by talking about how you went about it, we all learn from that. So it's great, and it needs to be published out there as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
There's just one more hand here raised. I'm just wondering, do we have time for the question, Adele? And
yeah, one last question from Tracy.
Yeah, Tracy, jump in there.
Hi, how are you? My name is Tracy O'Neill. I'm a PhD student in Trinity College, and thank you, Saoirse, for a fantastic presentation. So I'm also looking to incorporate PPI in my project with children and parents also. So I find this really, really interesting. Can I just double check, when you looked for ethics, did you have to get ethics purely because you probably want to evaluate the PPI involvement and maybe publish afterwards, or ethics isn't necessarily something that we have to get? Is that correct? Am I right in saying that?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's exactly. It's not necessary, but we were coming from a standpoint of, just in case we did get any that we did want to publish, we wanted to cover ourselves with ethics. Yeah. With
ethics after. So in fact, your PPI panel become your participants afterwards because you might want to evaluate it.
Yeah.
Again. Okay, that's good. Excellent. Listen, thanks so much. Really
Thank
good.
you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question and your engagement, and thank you, Saoirse, for that fabulous discussion. We are going to move on to our second case study. This case study is Emma Frawley, who's recently finished her PhD, and she'll be presenting with Meghan Cowman as well. So if you want it, John, if we can pin Emma and Meghan there. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Saoirse. That was really interesting. I really relate to a lot of what you were talking about ethics and kind of that starting point and getting things set up. So to introduce myself first, I'm Emma Frawley, and I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher in the School of Psychology at the University of Galway, and I'm also an occupational therapist as well. And with me today is Meghan Cowman, who will introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Meghan Cowman. I'm also now a PhD student in the School of Psychology, but I suppose today I'm kind of here more to talk about my contribution as a youth advisory panel member, which is kind of where I started out. So yeah.
Great. So yeah, so today I'm going to kind of go back to the beginnings of my PhD journey, which was back in 2018. And it's really about a youth advisory panel that we set up, myself and another PhD candidate, Emer Keneally, who's a social worker in Galway. And I suppose just to give a bit of a background first, a little bit of context, we were part of a collaborative doctoral award program, a CDA. So there was 5 of us that started PhDs at the same time. So myself and Emer were here at the University of Galway. We had people in UCD and in RCSI as well. And all different kinds of research. My research really focuses on psychosocial intervention for young people in mental health. And we had people looking at kind of epidemiology and just really kind of scientific studies as well. So I remember way back in the beginning in 2018, we had Adele Murphy come to talk to us about PPI as a group. And I remember a challenge at that point was that we all had really different opinions about PPI, how it fit in with each of our individual projects. And ultimately what happened was myself and Emer were really passionate about it. We really wanted PPI input on our projects. So we decided to create a local youth advisory panel of young people aged 18 to 25 who would consult on our PhDs, our individual PhD studies. So we recruited, and I know Saoirse talked about recruitment, but we focused on 18 to 25, and it was a big discussion at the time. Would we go under 18? And we were also had a big discussion about ethics applications, and ultimately we decided that we wouldn't go for an ethics application at the time, but we would keep the age group kind of 18 to 25 because some of those safeguarding issues and difficulties that Saoirse talked about. So we recruited by like an open call out to university students. We reached out to local youth groups like Faroga, different kind of groups around Galway. And that's when Meghan, you would have been one of the young people that expressed interest and got in touch with us to join the app. So I suppose maybe from your perspective, how was the recruitment process, or how did you hear about the app once we kind of did that initial call out?
Yeah, so I remember seeing the advertisement on Twitter, and I was really interested, and I'd like had no knowledge of PPI before that. I'd never heard of PPI or what a YAP was. So I remember before we kind of I suppose were formally joined the app, we had kind of more of an informal meeting with yourself and Emer, which was really helpful because you kind of both explained what a YAP was and what you were looking for from us, and also like what we could get out of the app. So that was really helpful in the beginning, because I think everyone who initially joined the app back when it was started up had kind of very little or no knowledge of PPI. And I remember the first kind of projects that we worked on were your PhD project and Emer's, and it was kind of in the very initial stages of the project. So like you were still kind of like planning protocols and developing kind of material for the projects. So we were involved from that kind of very early stage. And it was just really interesting because like it was even things like when you were contacting the participants for your study for the intervention, like how can you do that? That's kind of, I suppose, a non-threatening but also will be effective. And for Emer, it was like more about kind of developing her interview schedule for a qualitative study about the experience of CAMS. So that was really interesting as well, to kind of come up with things that you might want to ask a young person. And a lot of the panels had kind of personal lived experience of CAMS. So they had, really great insights into that as well. So it was really cool to kind of be involved in the projects when they were kind of starting up initially.
Yeah. And I remember meeting you, Meghan, and the other YAP members at the start. And I suppose Emer and myself are really transparent as well, that we were really new to PPI. So as a group, we were kind of feeling our way together through how it would work in the PhD. And really, I suppose at that stage, we were saying that we were consulting, and it was like a consultation level, and then we would see kind of where things went. So I suppose for my PhD in particular, it was those discussions that I had with the YAP that helped me recruit and kind of keep young people on board with the intervention. And I was able to write about that in the methods section in my thesis, for example, like those little kind of gems of knowledge that I got, and help that I got from the app as well, which was really, really good. And I think we got really comfortable as a group. So we met quite often in the beginning. We met really frequently. And I think the biggest part was to kind of build a group rapport and kind of get to know each other. And then we kind of started meeting less frequently. We kind of spread them out a bit more then, didn't we, after a while?
Yeah, I think it was definitely necessary in the beginning to have those more kind of frequent meetings, because none of us knew each other, and even just kind of feel, I suppose, comfortable to talk about things amongst the group. It was great to kind of build that relationship initially, and we had like loads of those kind of like icebreakers. I remember one of the meetings we were doing squats, but it was all really fun, and it was great to get to know each other, and we had pizza as well, which is always always good.
I think the feedback was that we wouldn't do squats ever again from the group, but we tried. But we always had food at the meetings when they were in person, and then everybody got reimbursed. We were lucky that our PI, although it wasn't actually written into the grant originally, we found kind of a bit of money that we could pay people for their travel and also for the time that they were there. So we were really lucky to do that. So we kind of got a bit brave then after a while, and we decided that we'd kind of co-produce a project. It was as part of the wider group. So this was kind of beyond my PhD and Emer's PhD. It was for the big group, and we were having this conference just in general about youth mental health, about kind of the current practices in Ireland, and we wanted to represent the voice of young people. And Meghan, you were really involved with this as well. So we worked with spunout.ie and the app, and kind of created a call out that we put on spunout.ie, and we asked young people to get in touch with, it could be a word, a poem, or any kind of written expression about the mental health service in Ireland, what they'd like to see. And then we worked with a theatre company to put kind of something together, and we'll show that video here today as well. But Meghan, you were really involved with this, and this was just when COVID happened. So what would have been really kind of interactive groups, all of a sudden we found ourselves online to create this particular piece of work. So how was the experience from your end?
I think you and Emer did a great job at moving it all online, because it, like, even the amount of work that went into it and kind of the hours that everybody put in, it kind of, I suppose, it made, I suppose, as a YAP member, it kind of, you know, represented what like real co-production is, I suppose, and what really kind of needs to go into that. So it was nice for a few of us to kind of get together and work a bit more on this. And I think, you know, there was the bigger group, but myself and two of the other YAP members kind of took this on, and it was a great experience. And even though it was online, we met loads with the theatre company and putting together the kind of material from the Spun Out call. So it was really kind of a meaningful piece of work, I think, and it was great to be a part of. But yeah, we had lots of Zoom meetings and recording ourselves talking as well. So yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah. So we might share the video with you guys now, just to, I suppose, show the finished product of the work. Megan's going to share it on her screen. And I think definitely one of the, I suppose, learnings was the amount of time. Like, we really underestimated the time involved, and it was something we reflected on afterwards, you know, to do it in a meaningful way. There was a lot of meetings, and I think it took maybe twice, if not 3 times longer than we first anticipated. But yeah, Megan's going to share the video now, and we can take questions and chat a bit more afterwards.
Can people see the video here in the background, the YouTube?
Yeah, I think it's just black. Yeah, at the moment, because yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I just play a second just to make sure people can hear it.
Yeah.
To be seen.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
To be heard. To be seen as you are.
To be heard and know the listener is trying to understand.
To be seen as you are and accepted.
To be heard and understood. I started experiencing terrible panic attacks. I decided I needed help. The first person I was assigned to, I did not feel comfortable with. Until I found someone that made me feel comfortable, I felt embarrassed and doubted what I was feeling. I was too scared to tell them that they weren't helping me because they weren't the right match. It's okay to change your counsellor. They won't take it personally. At 16, I didn't know that. Now, I'm 18, and I rarely experience mental difficulty. There's the odd trigger here and there, but overall, I feel great.
And waiting.
And waiting for help.
Suffering.
And waiting.
There once was a girl, and she had a little cloud right above her forehead. And when the day was good, it was very, very good. But when it was bad, it was horrid. Sometimes she couldn't go to college. Some days she couldn't work. And she just felt as if she was constantly being rained on. One day she decided something had to happen. So she went to Jigsaw, and they gave her a light rain jacket to cope with the rain. And that was okay for a while. Then she went to another therapist, and he gave her an umbrella to fight against the storm. Then she got tablets to stabilize it, and these helped, so she stopped taking them. Then she met another psychologist. He took away the umbrella and got her to look inside herself. And she realized that the cloud was something she'd created unknowingly, and that was okay. Because if she created it, she could manage it. And she started to become herself again. And it rained less, and she smiled more.
To be heard.
To be seen. A confusing, disjointed web of opening and closing office doors. Being asked, do I really need it? Repeat. Well-meaning, forced handshakes. Warm and cold together. Distinguished, yet not differentiated.
At the beginning of TY, I started feeling down and sad all the time. This continued throughout the year, and at some point, I got so frustrated, I would just lash out at everyone and everything. I didn't feel comfortable enough going to a GP. I was left helpless. Every secondary school should have a school psychologist on campus. My ideal mental health service would most importantly be free or affordable. I would advise checking local resources like youth clubs and resources online like Spun Out, Jigsaw, Aware, and Turn to Me.
Reaching out for help has been the best thing I've ever done, but also the most difficult. Looking back at my fragile 15-year-old self, I wish I could tell her that it would get better and that reaching out was the best thing to do. It really was a matter of life and death. In 2016, I started a weekly teen group in camps. When I first began, I was like a different girl. Frail, always shaking with anxiety, and unable to carry small talk. By the time I left, my confidence and my outlook on mental health had completely changed. When I left CAMS, it was very difficult to start over with a new support system. The adult mental health services provided 3 appointments every few months. I may have gotten a diagnosis, but other than that, I felt no support, community, or like they cared. I was seen by someone different every time, one of which was an 8-minute phone call. I left those services and found a wonderful psychotherapist. However, I am lucky that I can afford this service.
Confused. Overwhelmed. At sea.
Lost.
How do I navigate this system? How can I find myself?
My cries were ignored.
My cries were ignored.
Getting help can seem dramatic. It can feel like an admittance of defeat. Offering up a big white flag to a part of your mind that you spent a long time fighting. But it's not. A white flag is not always a surrender. It's also a sign of peace. Thanks to my time with therapy, I understand that my insecurities and fears don't have to control and inhibit me. I've learned that self-worth comes through the ability to have respect for and confidence in yourself, despite whatever perceived failures you've had.
You meet people and you talk to them, and you are heard.
It is not weak to ask for help.
Courage.
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 I've been to the city built of shiny concrete, walked by streams of dry water and broken beams of soft steel.
I've climbed to the top of flat mountains, danced to silent music, and stared at dark fire in a stove.
I've read books of blank paper, been burnt by snow, and fell up a cliff.
I've seen sense in madness.
Agony is triumph.
And lived the loophole of life.
So thanks, Megan. Thanks for sharing. We'll just let the credits play there. Well, we saw the names of the,
yeah.
so that's okay. Yeah. So you see, like, some young people opted to have their name on the credit at the end. And then some people prefer to remain anonymous, and that's okay. And so we just want to acknowledge everybody that kind of contributed to the piece and everything like that. And our YAP members, so Megan, Rory, and Emily, who did the voiceover. So this is, I think, probably still one of my favorite parts of my PhD, even though it wasn't directly related to my particular project, but it was in general about the theme of youth mental health and working in that area as a clinician as well. So this has been played at conferences. It's been quoted by the Ombudsman for Children.
That's everything.
And after this is played at the conference, the National Office for Suicide Prevention got in touch and asked could they put some snippets of it in their newest publication as well. So it kind of went a couple of places, and you know, I was really proud of the young people and the YAP members for that as well. So really, it was very much an example of co-production in that kind of every piece, every word was kind of decided on by the group. You know, all the images were reviewed by the group, the theatre company, and I suppose how we presented and everything like that. So Megan, how do you feel when you hear your own voice on the video still?
It's cringe, but no, it was so fun to be a part of, and it was like, I think it was a nice example of, well, as like the three of us that kind of were, there was actually, I think, four of us that were involved in like the smaller bit of a panel to organize it, and then the three of us that were kind of more involved then with voicing over. Like, we had such a good time, and it was kind of really meaningful for us as well to be part of something like that. So it was a great example of like, you know, something that I suppose the product that everyone ended up being like so happy with, and was great to be involved with.
Yeah, I suppose there was a definite beginning and ending to that particular piece of work. And then I know then Saoirse mentioned then, I suppose, as well, about the ending of you know, the PhD and things. So with our YAP, what happened really was that there was another round of funding provided by the HRB, and it was still in the area of youth mental health. And so although my PhD finished, the YAP continues on. And so Megan, you kind of then you were in a kind of a unique role that you aged out of the YAP, and then you started a job as a research assistant, and then you actually became a facilitator of the YAP, and I kind of handed the torch to you for a little while when my PhD was done. Yeah. So how, I suppose, if we have time, just I suppose to talk about how that was, I suppose, that transition from being an active member and then that change of role then to kind of facilitating it.
Yeah, it was definitely kind of unusual, because I think, like, I suppose, as you said, I was aging out, and I was kind of moving on as well into the research assistant job, and then eventually went on then to start my own PhD. But I still really wanted to be involved in a way that I could, and with that new project and the new funding, I really wanted to kind of continue being involved with PPI as well. But a lot of the members that continued on for, I suppose, kind of the second wave of the app were people that were my, you know, kind of YAP members. So it was kind of a bit weird to move into the facilitator role then. But I think, like, you know, because that we had such a, I suppose, the app was very established at that point, and everybody knew each other really well, and we all kind of had, you know, that kind of relationship built up. That really helped as well. And I think it was probably nice for them to have a friendly face as a co-facilitator, as well as another new kind of co-facilitator. But I think the app, I suppose, has evolved as well a lot. So we moved to online, obviously during COVID, which was kind of tricky. That was definitely a challenge. And I think now more recently, the kind of focus is trying to diversify the app, which is something that we've kind of been working on as well. But yeah, it was a bit weird to move into the facilitator role, but it was also really cool. And I really wanted to stay involved with PPI. So it kind of felt like a natural progression as well.
Yeah, and I think that the Seen and Heard video and experience, I think, gave a bit of confidence to the group as well, because I suppose what I've noticed is there's other co-production bits that have happened since. So we've had YAP members that have co-authored on articles, that have written pieces for the Irish Independent on youth mental health, have worked with Spun Out. So I think it kind of gave a little bit of a platform and a bit of confidence to people that there's, you know, pockets of work that's being done that's at the co-production level, and then some is still at the consultation level. And I think the good thing is that actually that's okay. You know, some bits it's appropriate to be kind of consultation, and then we can work on these little bits that are co-production. So it's been really great to see kind of where things have gone. So the app is still running currently, and I'm back involved again now in my postdoc role. So we will be recruiting again soon, and it always comes up about diversity, and I think probably a lot of people will relate to that, and I think that's our focus kind of in this next stage for the app as well. So thanks, Meghan, and thanks everyone for listening. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to attempt to answer. Thanks, Meghan.
Thanks so much. That was absolutely fascinating. Watching that video, I actually had goosebumps. Like it's a fantastic piece of work. Yes. Has anyone any questions they want to pop their hand up or put the question in the chat? I have a question. Well, maybe people are thinking about theirs. It's for Meghan, if you don't mind me directing a question for you. How that transition from being part of the YAP and then moving into a PhD student or PhD scholar, I suppose, can you talk a little bit more about that transition, and what experience, how has the experience being on the app helped you maybe in your PhD journey? Yeah.
I think the transition was greatly facilitated by Emma and Emer helping me loads initially when I was kind of getting set up. So that was great to have their kind of knowledge and expertise to move in. And I like having the, I suppose, experience of being a YAP member was really helpful as well. I think like moving like with I was lucky in that because of all the PPI work that Emma and Emer had done with ULEAD, the next grant that I was eventually joined to do my PhD project already had funding for PPI, and it was kind of outlined in the project already. I think the YAP actually consulted on that funding application as well. So I was lucky in that was all very kind of set up for me. The funding was there. But I think like when we first started facilitating the YAP online, I think the YAP members, because the group had been around for so long, were very sure of what they did and didn't want to do as well. Like they had their own ideas of kind of, I suppose, little side projects that they wanted to work on and stuff that they definitely didn't want to do. And they were very clear, I suppose, with this kind of newer YAP, that it wasn't as necessary to meet as often. So that was something that changed a bit, and that we met less frequently whenever it was kind of necessary. And then individual YAP members kind of worked on individual things. Like one of our YAP members worked on the research article and the Irish Independent article. That was something he was really passionate about doing. But yeah, to kind of more have like the YAP kind of told us that they wanted more kind of concrete pieces of work whenever they met. And people as well, you know, you have to respect that people are super busy. Like some of our YAP members were working full time. So, you know, when they did come to meetings, they wanted to make sure they felt like they were contributing something meaningful and it was kind of productive.
Fascinating. Thanks so much. We have time for just one more question, and it's coming from the chat here from Poonam. Did you require to apply for ethical approval in the application, specifically regarding the video, in creating the video?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, that was a big discussion at the time. So we partnered with spunout.ie for that. So if you're familiar with that platform, they often do call outs for material from young people and things. So we decided we were going to be guided by their kind of IP kind of rules and regulations, and they had safeguarding procedures built in. So everything was submitted to Spun Out. And so if there was something that, for example, someone was at risk or kind of shared something that needed to be checked in on, so Spun Out managed all of that for us. And then also when people submitted their material, we were really transparent about how it would be used. And so it was all kind of I suppose some of it addressed, I guess, at that issue at that stage. And then with the theatre company, then we just went ahead and made the video. So again, we were really unsure at the time, but after talking it through and just were led by Spun Out with that. So yeah, I'd be interested to know if we were to do it again, or if other people have done similar, did they apply for ethics? And I think it's something we really kind of grappled with at the time. But yeah, so no, we were led by Spun Out and their policies and procedures. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you to both Emma and Megan. That was absolutely brilliant. We are now moving on to do we have our speakers in for this, John and Edel? I know they are joining a little bit late.
James Larkin. And I see Louise is here.
Oh yeah, they're perfect. Yeah, great. So we have our next case study. This is James Larkin, Louise Foley, who are recent graduates, I believe. Recent PhD graduates, and they will also be joined by Tony Hickey, a PPI contributor from that piece of work. So welcome, and begin.
Thanks a million. So one quick thing is that Tony's having a few issues joining. So what I might do is get Louise to introduce us, and then Louise, you might talk us through, just an overview of the group, how it was set up, and then what it looked like in terms of, say, membership and practice. And then hopefully myself and Tony will be with you by that time.
Sure. That's great. Thank you, James. Great. So we're going to do a similar kind of interview style where James is going to ask some questions to myself and Tony about our experiences working as a PPI panel and PhD students during our projects. So just to give you a sense of the work James and I were doing, so we were part of a PhD program that was collaborative in nature. So we were 4 students, so myself and James, along with Bridget Kiley and Aisling Croke. We were all working on individual but related PhD projects on the topic of living with multiple ongoing health conditions. So our PPI aspect of our project, I suppose, was funded from the outset. And we began to make plans around that quite early on how we might embed PPI into our projects and into the wider programme. So we recruited some members onto the panel. So I suppose we first recruited through a number of different channels, so through charities, through professional contacts, through personal contacts. And we initially would have recruited about 12 panel members, and they were people who lived with multiple ongoing health conditions. And we also recruited a carer of someone who lived with multiple conditions. And I suppose in that early recruitment phase, we tried to be representative in terms of gender and things like where people were living in terms of their proximity to the city centre and to health services. And also we had some variation in how much experience people on the panel had working with researchers in the past, which was also really important as well. So we first met the panel in May of 2019. So we would have been about 9 months into our PhDs at that point. And we were meeting in person at first. So we started in 2018-19. It was the first year of our PhD. So we had just over a year before the pandemic. So we were meeting in person at that point about 4 times a year. And then I suppose a few months into the pandemic, we managed to move our meetings online, and that allowed us to meet a bit more often, which was really nice as well. So I suppose it's just to give you some context, the PPI in our PhD was kind of framed as a training opportunity, as well as an opportunity to work with the panel very closely on our research projects. So we were doing some formal PPI training throughout that time. And I suppose as well as that, the actual work we did with the panel, and I suppose recruiting the panel, working very closely with them on our projects was experiential training. So that was another part of, I suppose, a big part of our PhD program. So that's a kind of insight into how we got started and the kind of general makeup of the group. I'm just going to have a quick look. So it looks like Tony hasn't joined us yet. So
yes,
I wonder.
Just a quick update, Louise. So we're going to we'll keep going. And I think John
Sure.
is engaging with Tony, sending him a link that will hopefully work. That's
brilliant. That sounds great.
Oh, sorry. And so have you updated everyone on what it looked like and what it worked, how it worked day to day?
Yeah, so I can go to talk a bit about the kind of tasks we did before, during, and after a panel meeting. So beforehand, I suppose most of the work was around contacting the panel to arrange dates and times that would suit people. And then before each meeting with the panel, as a group of 4 PhD students, we would have met to kind of make a plan, see who was in a position to share some of their work with the panel at that moment of their PhD. And then among the other people, other PhD students, we divide tasks. So things like chairing the meeting, someone else would do the Zoom parts, someone else might take notes for the person presenting. So we really shared the workload in that way, and that was all planned before the meeting with the PPI panel.
Sorry, in terms of the sharing, did you ever have, no, I'm biased here that I was involved, but did you ever have any issues in terms of sharing out the workload, you know, and did you formalize that process, or did it just, you know, flow naturally?
Yeah, I suppose one part about working with a panel across the 4 PhDs was making sure everyone had an opportunity to engage with them regularly. So I think there was a balance there between making sure the workload was shared and also making sure that everyone had an opportunity to, I suppose, present their work to the panel and get their feedback on it. So I guess we would have planned it in advance to make sure that everyone had a role in the meeting. And yeah, I think it worked quite well that the workload was shared, and we all kind of would have communicated with 1 or 2 panel members directly to make sure that wasn't all on one person as well.
Yeah, I agree. Although I found sometimes, because it was 4 of us, you know, and we only met, was it at the start? I think we only met every 3 months. So sometimes you might have an ethics thing. 2 of us might have an ethics coming up, and it mightn't be our turn to go, and we'd have to kind of be a bit flexible or just wait. Oh, look, Tony's joined us. How you doing, Tony?
Hi, Tony. Hi, Joe.
And Joe, the dog. Can you hear us, Tony? We can't hear you, Tony.
Hi, guys. Hi, Louise.
Oh,
Hi, James.
Hi, Tony. Good to see you.
And Joe.
And Joe.
Yes, hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
We can indeed, yeah, perfectly.
Great to see you guys.
Super. So Tony, Louise is just
No
giving an overview of the panel and kind of some of our daily activities. And I wonder if I could ask you about your initial experience with the PPI group, you know, kind of being approached and then the initial meetings.
Sure. I guess our initial meetings were face to face. We met up in a hotel in town, which had the wonderful benefit that we could have a cup of tea during the meetings, like sort of collective cup of tea, which was very nice. And then with COVID, we had to go online. But I think we always felt that it was great. We had those few initial face-to-face meetings because it helped to consolidate the friendships and relationships that then built up over the coming months.
Sure. And how did you find the move online and then staying online?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say we all had a preference for the face-to-face meetings. You know, despite the convenience of online, where you can just do it from the comfort of your own armchair, but I think we all enjoyed the human contact, and we missed it then when it went away.
Sure. And Tony, to go back to the initial points, what was it like getting to grips with, you know, research in general and then our projects overall?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it, you know, it certainly took me a while to be able to differentiate between, you know, your project and Louise's project and sort of get it clear in my mind. So that was one thing. I guess there were issues around language as well, which which we had to kind of address and iron out. So there was, I suppose, like when any two kind of disparate groups come together, you know, there's going to be an integration, period of integration, and I think what happened with us was no different, really.
Sure. And can you talk to me a bit more about those issues with language you mentioned?
Yeah, sure. So I guess at times it felt like the PhD students were speaking a different language to us, and like there was one word in particular, which was the multimorbidity word, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but describing, you know, multiple conditions, multiple long-term conditions. But I think when we heard that, we were a little bit freaked out by it, and I think we lobbied a little bit to maybe see if we could find a different way of expressing the same concept, and we did. But I guess that's just one example. I mean, there were lots of different kind of words that are very much familiar to you guys, very much in your vernacular, but that were certainly new to us, and so there was that kind of learning period that had to take place as well.
Yeah, I certainly found that quite striking, you know, because we've been presented these big projects all about multimorbidity, and then it's like, you know, we talk to people who actually experience having multiple chronic conditions, like, well, we don't use this term or like this term, which kind of showed the benefit of PPI in very simple terms. Louise,
yeah.
What did you find? Like, how did you find the project impacted your work and your research, and then your general outlook?
Yeah, so I suppose building on what Tony has said there around language, I think that point on the word multimorbidity came up really early on, and was something that could be applied across all of our projects. And I think one of the earlier pieces I presented to the panel was a recruitment pack around recruiting people in general practice to come and do an interview study with me. And similar kind of points came up around communicating kind of clearly and sensitively with people who you were inviting into this experience of taking part in an interview. So the panel would have advised me to create a more visual and simple flyer to include in a recruitment pack that I could kind of distill what was in the information sheet, and kind of put the main points across a lot more clearly, that would allow people getting this pack in the post where they don't know what it's about when it arrives, to kind of make up or kind of think, do I want to read further? Is this for me? Is this relevant? Am I interested in this? So we didn't, I suppose, evaluate the impact of that, but we did have a better than expected response rate for that study, and perhaps it was that better and more sensitive communication made an impact there. In terms of more general outlook, then I suppose trying to compare meeting with the panel with meeting with your supervisors, you know, they're two sets of people who have a stake in your project, but the stakes are often very different. And the perspectives are very different. And I think when interacting with the panel in particular, I felt very aware of thinking about the wider implications of the research and why are we actually doing this. And I think having to justify your research to people who know a lot more about this experience of living with conditions or multiple conditions simultaneously, kind of having to make a case for it and justifying it makes you think about it in quite a different way. So yeah, it definitely directed me to look beyond the kind of degree and the papers and actually think what's this meaning for the real world, and is it really making sense from that perspective when you kind of have to communicate it in a slightly different way. So yeah.
Sure. And you mentioned there about your supervisors. Did you have any challenges? You know, I found it maybe a bit we ended up kind of on different wavelengths in terms of PPI because it's such a new thing. Did you have any experiences like that, Louise?
Yeah, I suppose in a way at the beginning I probably saw the PPI work as something, I suppose geographically I was based in Galway and I was like, oh, that's something I do in Dublin, and I meet the panel in Dublin, and maybe wasn't bringing that back to my supervisors as often as I should have. But then I suppose as time went on, it became, I suppose, more of something we spoke about in meetings. And I think because our supervisors were well aware of the position of PPI in the programme, that was always a welcome conversation, probably something that improved and was given more time in those supervisory meetings as time went on.
Perfect. Cheers, Louise. And Tony, you had kind of a, I suppose, a bigger impact on my project maybe than some others. You worked quite closely on a survey I did about the cost of accessing healthcare. I wonder if you could just talk us through some of the ways you were involved with that project.
So again, that work began at a stage when the panel was well established, and we got to know each other. We were communicating very well at that stage. I suppose one thing to say before I answer your question is that as panel members, we were always very encouraged by the way the PhD students would take on board our suggestions. So this wasn't just a kind of a talking shop. This was you were listening very carefully to what we were saying and taking it on board. And I think once we became aware of that, it fired us to engage more fully with the process, because we knew we were being listened to. But then, sorry, to answer your question, James. Yeah, I mean, I found, I suppose, I liked working in the bigger panel. We worked well together, and there's the wider panel, you'll get a kind of wider cross section of views and opinions, and I like just you and I working together. I think it worked, and I think we did good work together. So yeah, I'm say the lines of communication were well established by that stage.
Perfect. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, I certainly felt like I had more confidence as the panel went on. I sense that you're saying as the panel went on, you guys also got a bit more confidence in your contributions. Louise, before we finish, could you, so one of the kind of unique aspects of what we did was an evaluation of the whole PPI process. I wonder if you could just talk us through, I know you only have about 2 minutes to do this, but could you just try to talk us through that whole process and what came of it?
Yeah, so I'll keep it brief, but as James mentioned, we evaluated what was the impact of, it was actually the impact of doing this training, so that formal and experiential training in PPI on the project and on the wider programme. So there was a few approaches we took to the evaluation. So after 24 months of PPI involvement in our project, there was some focus group discussions. So the PPI panel did one, the PhD students did another, and then our supervisors did another focus group. And they were repeated then by the panel and by our supervisors at 36 months, so after 3 years. And at that point, as students, we also did individual interviews. And we were really interested in understanding both the process and the impact of this embedding of PPI in the programme and PPI training. So we kept some activity logs to get a sense of how much time was this taking and kind of what was involved in actually doing the work of working with PPI panel, and also an impact log to try to understand how was it changing our projects and developing our projects in different ways. And then we had some group reflections that were also analysed as well. So that's kind of a sense of what we did. I don't know if that gave enough info there in a couple of minutes. Our papers, yeah, go ahead.
That's great. And Tony, how did you find the process? Because I know people have mentioned before we joined, maybe some confusion about being a participant versus being a member of the PPI panel. How did you find the process of moving from being on the PPI panel to kind of an evaluation with an outside person coming and interviewing about the whole PPI process?
I found it quite seamless, really, James. I think that the outside person who came in just kind of integrated very well with the process. So it there was no kind of sense of kind of jolt from that change.
Great. Thanks a million, Tony. That's everything from us. Unless if anyone has questions, we'd be delighted to answer and engage. Thanks a million, Louise and Tony, for your wonderful insights. Great working with you.
Thank you to all three of you for the rundown of what the brilliant work that you did. If anyone has any questions, you can pop them into the chat or raise your hand for anyone here. While we're maybe waiting for people to pop their questions in, I do have one question, and it's for any one of you to answer. Maybe, do you have any advice? I know you spoke about that kind of language and like the PhD students speaking a different language. Have you any advice for PhD students starting out on their PPI journey? How do we tackle, any tips or tricks on how we can do it better and not not speak too much of that language, the jargon, I suppose?
Yeah, I could begin. I suppose we had very case-specific learnings from the PPI panel in terms of that word multimorbidity, and maybe I know some people, not myself or James, but Bridget or Aisling, were doing trials and randomized trials, and sometimes it's hard to pick how else could you describe that. But a lot of the language that we use that might feel specific to our project is actually generalizable across projects, and I do wonder, is that something that, you know, it maybe might be up to every PPI panel to have to repeat that, and maybe it's something that there could be training on, maybe led by PPI panel members. That's maybe a bit more generic, and rather than everyone in their own project learning the specific terms repeatedly. It's just a suggestion. It's not necessarily something that we did, but it does come up time and time again across meetings. So maybe it's something that we could work on before we go into these environments. I don't know, Tony, if you have any insights there of what we could do better.
I think there's almost an inevitability when two disparate groups come together that there will be issues around language and the way people express themselves. But with time, I mean, while that was an issue early on in the whole project, I think by a few months, really, it wasn't an issue anymore. So, it'd be like I don't think the panel wants to down their language, if that's the right phrase, but it's just a kind of it's a process, and I think in our case it came to a very satisfying conclusion, after a few meetings.
Yeah, I agree with Tony. I think it's a bit. It just takes a bit of time as well, and you just can't I think there's Louise's idea of a bit of training beforehand, but you just can't replace that experience and time of just working with it. More than when you get a new supervisor, it takes a bit of time to get on the same page as them, no matter who it is. So I suppose it's not overthinking the whole thing and realizing that any new person you meet takes a bit of, but I agree what Louise suggests, some maybe PPI-led teaching on it would be helpful. Any other
John,
questions?
do you want to?
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to jump in there, John, quickly, and then
Yeah,
we've time for just one more.
I was just curious, how did your PhD scholars feel about being research participants themselves? Were they excited for it or hesitant about it, or kind of what were their feelings around that?
Yeah, I could start there. I think it was important that there was, so we had an independent researcher. So just to point out, myself and James and Aisling and Bridget were the PhD students in the study and also working as researchers on the study. So an independent researcher would have done the interviewing of all of us, because there was kind of unique roles and relationships there between ourselves and the panel, and ourselves and our supervisors. So I think it was dealt with very carefully and sensitively, and anything that we kind of put forward in our interviews or focus groups we had a chance to kind of sense check and make sure that we were happy with that too. So I think we were quite protected, and it was a very comfortable space to be interviewed as a student.
Yeah, I find it quite a satisfying process because you're in the actual, when you're in the process of doing the whole PPI, you don't get a chance. Like we obviously reflected a bit, but it's very different when someone sits down with you for 40 minutes and asks you big picture questions. It really makes you think about it a lot, and it lets you get things that, like, crystallize things in your mind that you haven't had time to spend thinking about, and articulate those, which is quite a satisfying process, and makes me a little bit less guilty about interviewing healthcare professionals and not offering them any money or rewards for doing it. Makes me think they got something out of it.
Thanks so much. Thank you everyone for your fantastic presentations and for sharing your insights. Just to plug our next webinar in the series is next Friday, same time online. It will be about embedding PPI in your PhD. And I think John is going to share the flyer for the Ignite Insight series into the chat there, and you can find it on the PPI website as well to sign up for any of our events throughout the festival. I don't know if Edel or John have any closing comments you want to just jump in there if I forgot anything.
No, absolutely brilliant, Ayla. And I think starting from Saoirse, you set a phenomenally high standard for the Ignite Insight series, Saoirse. But Emma, Meghan, Louise, Tony and James absolutely kept up the standard. So I found the whole thing fascinating, and it's really rewarding to see the progress in PhDs doing PPI. So well done to everybody. That's it.
Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.